Motion in your step.
Motivation in your heart.
Hello, and welcome to today's Motion and Motivation podcast.
We've put together a study guide for everyone. If you need it, you can grab it from the video description. All right, let's jump into this deep dive into Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday.
Yeah, excited to dig into this one.
We've got some really fascinating excerpts to unpack.
It's a book that's really resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, and for good reason.
I mean, who hasn't struggled with ego at some point?
Right, it's something we all deal with.
And Holiday does such a great job of breaking down these complex ideas.
Yeah, making them relatable and practical.
So what's the mission here? What are we hoping to get out of this deep dive?
Well, the goal is to really understand how ego can be this sneaky saboteur in our lives.
That's a great way to put it, a saboteur.
Especially on the path to success, you know?
Yeah, it can trip us up when we're striving for something big.
But also, even when we achieve success, ego can still be this dangerous force.
Oh, absolutely. Success can almost amplify the ego.
Right. It can feed it and make it even harder to manage.
So we're going to explore all that, the good, the bad, the ugly of ego.
And most importantly, we're going to equip ourselves with practical strategies for keeping it in check.
Tools and tactics for taming that inner critic.
Exactly, because we all have that inner critic, that voice of self-doubt.
And sometimes that voice can morph into this arrogant, egotistical monster.
Right, and that's when it can really start to derail us.
Okay, so to kick things off, how does Holiday define ego? What is it exactly?
So he describes it as this unhealthy belief in our own importance.
Okay, so it's not just about having confidence, it's something more than that.
Right, it's that inflated sense of self, that arrogance and self-centered ambition.
That can really distort our perception of reality.
Yeah, it's like we're wearing those funhouse mirror glasses. Everything is warped.
I love that analogy, the funhouse mirror. It really captures the essence of how ego can mess with our perspective.
And Holiday drives this point home with a powerful quote from Bill Walsh, the legendary football coach.
Oh yeah, Walsh, the guy who turned the 49ers into a dynasty.
Exactly. He knew a thing or two about success and about ego.
So what did Walsh have to say about ego?
Well, he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that self-confidence can easily morph into arrogance.
Okay, so there's a fine line between healthy confidence and egotism.
Right, and assertiveness can become stubbornness.
And self-assurance can turn into reckless abandon.
It's like this slippery slope, you know?
We start with good intentions, but ego can sneakily take over.
And the worst part is sometimes our culture actually rewards these ego-driven behaviors.
It's true. We often celebrate people who are loud, flashy, and self-promoting, even if they haven't really accomplished much.
It's like the sizzle is more important than the steak.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do we make sure we're focused on the steak and not just the sizzle?
Well, one of the first things Holiday talks about is this distinction between talking the talk and walking the walk.
Okay, so it's about action versus appearances.
Exactly, and he uses this really interesting story about Upton Sinclair, the writer.
Sinclair, yeah, I know that name. Wasn't he a social activist or something?
Yeah, he wrote The Jungle, that expose about the meatpacking industry.
Right. That was a big deal back in the day.
So Sinclair decides to run for governor of California.
Okay, ambitious guy.
And get this, he actually writes a book titled I, Governor of California, and How I Ended Poverty.
Wait, he wrote a book about being governor before he even won the election?
Yep, talk about counting your chickens before they hatch.
Wow, that's some serious ego at play.
And it seems like that's exactly what happened. He got so caught up in the fantasy of being governor.
He lost sight of the actual work of campaigning.
Exactly. He basically talked himself out of a win.
So the lesson here is don't get ahead of yourself. Stay focused on the present moment, on the actual work.
Right. And Holiday contrasts Sinclair's approach with a totally different mindset embodied by John Boyd.
John Boyd, who's that?
He was a brilliant military strategist, had a huge impact on military thinking.
But I've never heard of him.
Well, that's kind of the point. Boyd was all about substance over style, action over recognition.
He was the guy behind the scenes making things happen.
Exactly. He shunned the limelight, avoided self-promotion.
So what was his secret sauce? How did he achieve so much while staying under the radar?
He had this simple but profound question he always asked himself. To be or to do?
To be or to do, huh? I like that. It's so simple, yet so powerful.
It forces you to confront your priorities. Are you more concerned with looking successful or actually getting things done?
It's a great gut check for the ego.
And this idea of focusing on the substance, the real work, rather than just looking successful really resonates with me.
Yeah, it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
And it's a great segue into another key point Holiday makes, the student mindset.
The student mindset, okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So he uses this awesome example of Kirk Hammett from Metallica.
Kirk Hammett, the lead guitarist, yeah, he's a legend.
You'd think joining one of the biggest metal bands in the world would be the ultimate validation for a guitarist.
Totally. Peak achievement unlocked.
But Hammett understood that the journey never really ends. There's always more to learn.
So what did he do? Did he rest on his laurels and just coast on his Metallica fame?
Nope, he actually sought out guitar lessons from Joe Satriani.
Joe Satriani, another guitar god.
Mhm.
Wow, that's humility.
Right, even when you're at the top of your game, there's always room for growth.
So the takeaway here is no matter how successful you become, there's always more to learn.
It's about adopting this mindset of continuous learning, always being a student.
And that's so important in any field, not just music.
Absolutely. Ego often makes us resistant to this. It makes us think we know it all.
But embracing that student mindset keeps us curious, keeps us hungry for knowledge.
And that's what fuels growth and adaptability, which are essential for success in the long run.
Okay, so we've got action over appearances, the student mindset. What else does Holiday have up his sleeve?
Well, he introduces this concept he calls the canvas strategy, which really fascinated me.
The canvas strategy. Okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
So it's this idea of focusing on making others successful, even if it means putting our own ego aside.
Interesting. So it's not about being the star of the show. It's about supporting the cast.
Exactly. And he uses Benjamin Franklin as a prime example.
Ben Franklin, founding father, inventor, all-around genius.
Early in his career, Franklin actually chose to write anonymously
What, he didn't take credit for his work. Why would he do that?
because he was more interested in contributing to the success of others.
That's pretty selfless.
And he even gave his work away for free.
Wow, he wasn't seeking fame or fortune. He just wanted to make a difference.
Exactly. And Holiday argues that by doing this, Franklin was subtly shaping his own career.
He was like the canvas that shapes the painting.
Right. By supporting others, he was creating a space for himself to thrive.
That's a brilliant analogy. The canvas strategy.
And he also brings up Bill Belichick, the mastermind coach of the New England Patriots.
Belichick, yeah, the guy with all the Super Bowl rings.
He started out as a low-level assistant, doing whatever was asked of him.
Even if it wasn't glamorous or prestigious.
Right. He didn't let ego get in the way of learning and contributing.
He was willing to pay his dues.
And that ultimately led to those bigger opportunities.
So the lesson is, sometimes you have to put your ego aside and focus on helping others succeed.
And in doing so, you create the conditions for your own success.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
This reminds me of Jackie Robinson's incredible story, which Holiday uses to highlight the importance of restraint.
Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Yeah, what a powerful example.
He faced unimaginable racism and abuse.
It's hard to even fathom what he went through.
But he made a conscious choice not to react, not to lash out.
He knew that would have undermined his mission and the larger fight for equality.
Talk about taking the high road.
And it took incredible strength and discipline.
He understood that his actions had implications far beyond his own personal feelings.
He was playing the long game.
And this connects to a bigger idea. Holiday emphasizes we all face nonsense and setbacks in life.
Especially when we're pursuing big goals.
Ego wants us to react emotionally, to get defensive, to lash out.
But often, the most effective approach is to stay calm and focused on finding solutions.
It's about choosing the strategic approach over immediate gratification.
It's about taming that impulsive reactive ego.
Now, speaking of self-sabotage, Holiday goes on to warn us about the dangers of living inside our own heads.
Oh, yeah, getting caught up in our own thoughts and stories.
He talks about how we can get trapped in these narratives of self-importance.
Or self-loathing, that's the other side of the coin.
And how these stories can distort our perception of reality.
It's like we create our own little echo chambers.
He even compares it to the imaginary audience we often experience in adolescence.
Oh, totally. That feeling like everyone is watching and judging our every move.
It's like we never truly grow out of that.
And that tendency to overthink and get caught up in our own internal drama can really persist into adulthood.
And that can be so detrimental.
Ego can make us blind to the truth. It can cloud our judgment.
He uses the example of General George McClellan during the Civil War.
McClellan, wasn't he a brilliant strategist, but also incredibly egotistical?
Exactly. He overestimated his own abilities, underestimated his opponents.
And it led to some costly mistakes.
It's a reminder that even incredibly intelligent people can fall prey to their own egos.
So intelligence and talent Don't make us immune to ego's traps.
And speaking of which, Holiday also mentions Ben Franklin again.
Ben Franklin? Again, what about him this time?
Well, he points out that as a young man, Franklin was actually quite arrogant himself.
Oh, really? That's surprising.
But here's the thing, Franklin recognized this tendency in himself,
He had that self-awareness.
and he consciously worked to cultivate humility.
Wow, that's impressive. To recognize your own flaws and actively work on them.
He realized that pride could be his downfall, so he made a real effort to listen to others and be open to feedback.
That's a fantastic example of self-awareness being a superpower.
By understanding our ego's tendencies, we can start to counteract them.
It's about becoming the master of our own minds, not letting our ego run the show.
Okay, so far we've mainly focused on the dangers of ego when we're striving towards a goal.
But what about when we achieve success? How does ego show up then?
Well, Holiday argues that this can be even more dangerous
Really? Why is that?
because success can inflate our ego, make us think we're invincible.
It can feed that sense of self-importance.
And he uses the compelling story of Howard Hughes to illustrate this.
Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire, aviator, filmmaker.
He achieved incredible success in various fields.
But he was also notoriously reclusive and paranoid later in life.
And that's the tragedy of Hughes. He had it all.
But he let his ego ruin everything.
He became increasingly isolated, obsessed with control, and ultimately his own worst enemy.
It's a classic example of someone who let success go to their head.
And to contrast that, Holiday highlights the life of General George Marshall.
George Marshall, the mastermind behind the Marshall Plan after World War II.
He achieved remarkable success as a military leader and statesman.
But he remained humble and selfless throughout his career.
So it's not just about achieving success, it's about how we handle it.
It's about staying grounded, remembering our values.
What made Marshall different was his unwavering focus on serving others.
He was known for putting the needs of his country and his soldiers above his own ambition.
He was even offered the command of the D-Day invasion, but turned it down.
Wow, talk about putting ego aside for the greater good.
He believed he could be more valuable in his current role, coordinating the overall war effort.
That takes a remarkable amount of humility and selflessness.
It reminds us that true success isn't about personal accolades. It's about making a meaningful contribution.
It's about leaving the world a better place than we found it,
And that often requires a willingness to set our egos aside.
to focus on something bigger than ourselves.
This has been an incredibly insightful discussion so far.
We've seen how ego can be an enemy when we're striving for something, and even more so when we achieve success.
It's this constant battle we all face.
And we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
Absolutely, but I think this is a good place to pause for now.
Take a breather, let these ideas sink in.
And we'll pick up where we left off in part 2 of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
See you there.
All right.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy.
Glad to be back.
We've been exploring how ego can be this sneaky saboteur in our lives.
Yeah, it can really trip us up in all sorts of ways.
And we've seen how it can show up both when we're striving for something and when we've achieved success,
It's like ego is always lurking in the shadows.
ready to pounce when we least expect it.
So before we dive into the next batch of excerpts, I think it's worth quickly recapping some of the key strategies we discussed in the last part.
Yeah, good idea, just to refresh our memory.
So we talked about the importance of choosing action over appearances,
Right, walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
and about maintaining that student mindset, always being open to learning and growth.
No matter how successful we become,
And then there's the canvas strategy, that idea of focusing on making others successful.
even if it means putting our own ego aside.
And let's not forget the power of restraint, choosing the long game over immediate gratification.
Especially when faced with challenges and setbacks.
So those are some of the key tools we've got in our arsenal for battling ego.
Now, one of the most impactful stories Holiday uses to illustrate these concepts is the story of Malcolm X.
Malcolm X, yeah. His transformation during his time in prison is incredible.
He could have easily succumbed to despair and anger,
Given the circumstances, it would have been understandable.
but instead, he chose to use that time for personal growth.
He turned his prison cell into his own personal university.
He became a voracious reader, he educated himself,
He really embodies that idea of turning obstacles into opportunities.
and Holiday refers to this as choosing alive time over dead time,
That's a powerful distinction. It's about making every moment count.
even when we're facing adversity.
And speaking of navigating difficult situations, I'm reminded of the story of the Roman general Belisarius.
Belisarius, remind me about him.
He was this brilliant military commander who achieved some incredible victories for the Byzantine Empire.
But she was ultimately betrayed and imprisoned by the Emperor Justinian.
Talk about a tough break.
It would have been easy for him to become bitter and resentful.
To let that experience define him.
But he didn't. He maintained his dignity and his sense of purpose.
Even in the face of such injustice.
It's a testament to his resilience, his ability to rise above his circumstances.
Now, shifting gears a bit, Holiday also spends some time discussing the importance of learning from our failures.
Which can be a real ego minefield.
Oh, absolutely. Ego hates to admit defeat.
It's much easier to blame others or make excuses
Than to honestly evaluate our mistakes and learn from them.
And Holiday argues that this defensive mechanism is actually what prevents us from growing and evolving.
It's like we're building a wall around ourselves, protecting our ego from the discomfort of failure.
But in doing so, we're also blocking ourselves from valuable lessons.
He uses this interesting example of the New England Patriots drafting Tom Brady.
Tom Brady, the GOAT. Yeah, that was a pretty good pick.
But guess what? The Patriots were actually disappointed in themselves.
Wait, they drafted Tom Brady? Why would they be disappointed?
Because they realized they had underestimated him.
They had all this scouting data, all this expertise.
And they still almost missed out on drafting one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time.
So instead of patting themselves on the back for their success, they chose to analyze their process.
They wanted to figure out how they could do better next time.
That's remarkable. They were already successful, but they were still striving for improvement.
And that's a hallmark of a true growth mindset.
It reminds me of the story Holiday tells about John Wooden, the legendary UCLA basketball coach.
John Wooden, the Wizard of Westwood. Yeah, he was something else.
Wooden didn't define success simply by wins and losses.
He had a different metric.
For him, it was about whether his players had given their best effort.
It was about striving for excellence in every moment.
Regardless of the outcome.
And that's such a powerful way to approach not just sports, but life in general.
It's not about seeking external validation. It's about finding fulfillment in the pursuit of our own potential.
It's about the journey, the process, the commitment to doing our best.
I love that. It's about finding joy in the work itself.
And speaking of detaching from outcomes, Holiday tells this heartbreaking story about the writer John Kennedy Toole.
John Kennedy Toole, the author of A Confederacy of Dunces.
His story is a tragic example of what can happen when we allow external validation to define our worth.
He committed suicide after his novel was repeatedly rejected by publishers.
And it was later published posthumously and won the Pulitzer Prize.
It's heartbreaking to think that if he had been able to detach himself from the outcome,
to find value in his work, regardless of whether it was published or not,
things might have turned out differently.
It's a stark reminder that our work has inherent value, even if it's not immediately recognized by others.
And we need to find satisfaction in the act of creation itself.
Not just in the potential reward.
Yeah. So we've seen how ego can distort our perceptions of success and failure.
And how it can prevent us from learning from our mistakes.
It can make us cling to outcomes and crave external validation.
So, how do we break free from this ego trap?
What are some concrete steps we can take?
Well, one of the key insights Holiday offers is the importance of confronting our ego head-on.
To stand up to it, to challenge its grip on our thoughts and actions.
He uses this fascinating story of Orson Welles and his film Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane, considered one of the greatest films ever made.
But it was savagely attacked by William Randolph Hearst.
Hearst, the powerful media tycoon, he believed the film was based on his life.
And he used his influence to try to destroy the film and Wells's reputation.
But Welles didn't back down.
He knew he had created something special.
He stood by his work and ultimately prevailed.
Even in the face of such powerful opposition.
It's a testament to the power of courage and conviction.
It reminds us that we need to be willing to stand up for what we believe in.
Even when it's difficult.
Even when we're facing powerful forces that try to silence us.
So how do we silence that inner voice that's constantly trying to sabotage us?
How do we quiet the ego's relentless chatter?
One strategy Holiday recommends is to find something larger than ourselves to connect with.
To find a cause, a mission, a purpose that transcends our own personal ambitions.
He brings up the example of Winston Churchill.
Churchill, the British Prime Minister during World War II.
He faced immense opposition and setbacks throughout his career.
But he drew strength from his belief in something bigger than himself.
The future of his country, the fight against tyranny, the preservation of freedom.
He understood that his own ego was insignificant compared to these larger ideals.
So it's about aligning ourselves with something that gives us a sense of meaning and purpose.
Something that transcends our own ego-driven desires.
Holiday also mentions Katharine Graham.
Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post.
She found strength and purpose in her commitment to the Post and its mission to inform the public.
It's interesting how both Churchill and Graham found strength and resilience in something external to themselves.
It gave them a sense of perspective and helped them overcome their own ego's limitations.
And that's something we can all do.
Whether it's our family, our community, our work, or a larger cause we believe in.
We can all find something to connect with that gives our lives meaning and purpose.
This reminds me of the story Holiday tells about the entertainer Sammy Davis Jr.
Sammy Davis Jr., the Rat Pack legend.
He converted to Judaism after a near-fatal car accident.
It was a profound turning point in his life.
He had always struggled with his identity.
But his brush with death made him realize he needed something more than fame and fortune.
He found that deeper meaning and sense of belonging in Judaism.
It's a powerful example of how even those who seem to have it all can still be searching for something more.
Something to give their lives depth and purpose.
But what about those times when we're really struggling, when we're feeling lost and uncertain?
How do we stay grounded and manage our ego when facing adversity?
One of the strategies Holiday emphasizes is focusing on what we can control.
Not letting our circumstances define us.
He shares the powerful story of James Stockdale.
James Stockdale, the Navy pilot who was shot down and imprisoned in Vietnam.
He endured years of torture and solitary confinement.
It's unimaginable what he went through.
But even in those horrific circumstances, he refused to let his captors break him.
He focused on what he could control, his thoughts, his attitude, his behavior.
He developed a system of communication with other prisoners.
Using taps on the walls.
It's incredible he found a way to resist, to maintain his dignity.
And it speaks to the power of our inner strength and resilience.
Even in the darkest of times.
It shows us that we always have a choice.
We can choose to be victims, or we can choose to find ways to resist, to maintain our hope.
And this reminds me of another powerful story Holiday shares about Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust.
His experience in the concentration camps led him to a profound realization.
Even in those unimaginable conditions, prisoners still had a choice.
They could choose to give up.
Or they could choose to find meaning in their suffering.
That's an incredibly powerful insight.
And it's relevant to all of us, even though our challenges may be far less extreme.
We all face setbacks, disappointments, and losses.
And it's our attitude, our perspective, our choices that determine how we navigate those experiences.
So it's about finding that inner strength, that resilience that allows us to keep going.
Even when we want to give up.
Now, in addition to focusing on what we can control, Holiday also highlights the importance of gratitude.
Gratitude, yeah. It's easy to forget about that when we're struggling.
But he argues that focusing on what we're grateful for can help shift our perspective.
It can counteract the negative effects of ego.
When we're consumed by ego, we tend to focus on what we lack.
What we haven't achieved, what's wrong with our lives.
But when we shift our focus to what we're grateful for, we start to appreciate the good things we have.
It's like a mental reset button.
Instead of dwelling on the negative, we start to see the abundance in our lives.
And that can have a ripple effect on our overall well-being.
Gratitude can be a powerful antidote to ego.
And along with gratitude, Holiday also encourages us to cultivate humility.
Humility, that's a tough one for a lot of people, especially in today's world.
It's often seen as a weakness.
But Holiday emphasizes that humility isn't about thinking less of ourselves.
It's about thinking of ourselves less.
I love that distinction.
It's not about putting ourselves down. It's about shifting our focus outward.
It's about getting out of our own heads and focusing on others.
It's about recognizing that we're not the center of the universe.
And it's about being open to learning from others.
Even those we might consider beneath us.
So it's about being a student of life.
Always willing to learn and grow.
Regardless of our position or achievements.
This has been an incredibly rich and thought-provoking discussion so far.
We've explored how to manage our ego when faced with failure.
The importance of learning from our mistakes.
And some key strategies for staying grounded and resilient in the face of adversity.
We've delved into the transformative power of connecting with something larger than ourselves.
The importance of gratitude.
And the value of cultivating humility.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to come.
So much more to unpack.
Be sure to join us for the final part of our deep dive into Ego is the Enemy,
where we'll explore some concluding thoughts and insights from this insightful book.
We look forward to seeing you there. All right, welcome back to our final part of this deep dive.
Yeah, can't believe we're already here.
Time flies when you're battling ego.
That's for sure.
We've been exploring Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy.
unpacking all these fascinating ideas about how ego can trip us up.
And we've been sharing some practical strategies for keeping it in check.
Hopefully some useful tools for our listeners.
Yeah, because this is something we all struggle with.
It's a constant battle.
So before we wrap things up, I think it's important to emphasize that managing ego is an ongoing process.
It's not like you conquer it once and you're done.
It's more like tending a garden.
You have to keep weeding, keep nurturing, keep paying attention.
Because ego is sneaky, it can creep back in when we least expect it.
Especially when things are going well.
When we're feeling successful, when we're getting all this external validation.
That's when it can be really easy to let our guard down.
So what are some red flags that might indicate our ego is starting to regain control?
Well, I think arrogance is a big one.
When we start believing we're better than others.
That we have all the answers, that we're entitled to special treatment.
That's a clear sign that ego is back in the driver's seat.
Another telltale sign is defensiveness.
When we're unwilling to listen to feedback.
When we're quick to blame others for our mistakes.
Or when we can't handle criticism gracefully.
It suggests that our ego is feeling threatened and trying to protect itself.
And then there's that constant need for validation.
When we're perpetually seeking approval from others.
Obsessed with our image, more concerned with appearances than substance.
That's a surefire sign that ego is calling the shots.
So how do we combat these tendencies?
Holiday offers some great advice.
One strategy he recommends is practicing stillness.
Taking time each day to quiet our minds.
To reconnect with our inner selves.
Whether it's through meditation, prayer, spending time in nature.
Whatever helps us escape the relentless chatter of our ego.
And reconnect with our values and our purpose.
It's about creating that space for reflection.
To gain some much-needed perspective.
And speaking of honesty, Holiday also emphasizes the importance of self-reflection.
Regularly taking stock of our thoughts, actions, and motivations.
Asking ourselves those tough questions.
Like, am I living in alignment with my values?
Am I letting ego drive my decisions?
Am I making a positive impact on the world?
These questions can be uncomfortable, but they're essential for growth.
It's about having that courage to be honest with ourselves.
And another powerful strategy Holiday highlights is to focus on our efforts.
Rather than getting fixated on the outcome.
This goes back to what we were talking about with John Wooden.
It's about finding satisfaction in the process of doing the work.
Regardless of whether it leads to external success or recognition, it's about letting go of our attachment to results.
And finding joy in the journey itself.
Celebrating the small victories, the daily efforts.
It's a shift in perspective from scarcity to abundance.
And speaking of abundance, practicing gratitude is another powerful antidote to ego.
When we focus on what we're grateful for, it shifts our energy.
It helps us appreciate what we have.
Rather than constantly striving for what we lack.
And this brings us to the final, and perhaps most crucial point, the cultivation of humility.
Humility. It's such a misunderstood concept.
It's not about putting ourselves down or diminishing our accomplishments.
It's about a shift in focus.
From self-centeredness to a broader perspective.
It's about recognizing that we're not the center of the universe.
That we're part of something much larger than ourselves.
And it's about being open to learning from others.
Regardless of their status or expertise. This reminds me of that powerful quote from Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh yeah, the man in the arena.
It is not the critic who counts.
Not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles.
The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena.
Whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Who strives valiantly. Who errs. Who comes short again and again.
Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming.
But who does actually strive to do the deeds?
Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions?
Who spends himself in a worthy cause?
Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement?
And who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly.
So that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
It's a powerful reminder to embrace the challenge, the struggle.
To show up authentically and give it our all.
Even if it means risking failure. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into ego is the enemy, what's the one key takeaway we want our listeners to remember?
Ego is a powerful force, a sneaky opponent.
It can sabotage our efforts in every area of life.
But it doesn't have to control us.
By cultivating self-awareness, practicing humility, and connecting with something larger than ourselves.
We can learn to manage our ego.
And use its energy for good.
Remember that quote Holiday uses, "Can you handle success? Or will it be the worst thing that ever happened to you?"
It's a thought-provoking question that challenges us to really examine our relationship with success.
And to make sure we're not letting ego hijack our journey.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into ego is the enemy.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Keep learning, keep growing, and keep that ego in check.
Until next time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. That way you won't miss any of our updates. Also, if you think this video could help others, please share it with them. Thanks for watching and for your support.